On the kind of summer afternoon that makes a town forget it ever owned umbrellas, 4 boys pedaled past the last mailbox and into the ribs of the hills. Tires whispered over gravel. A crow stitched a black thread across the sky. They were loud, the way boys are when nothing bad has ever happened, until the forest answered with a sound they didn't recognize. By nightfall, the storm arrived like a closed fist. Lightning wrote its name across the ridges, thunder erased it. The boys found a cave and called it safe, the way children sometimes name the dark to make it smaller. But water has its own ideas, and rock keeps secrets. Back in town, kitchen lights burned late. Mothers stood with phones pressed to their hearts. A retired canine handler watched the square from his porch, one hand resting on the scarred muzzle of a German shepherd, who didn't blink when thunder spoke. Luna's ears lifted. Her body knew before anyone did. This is not a tale about fear. It's about what pushes through fear, about a dog who chose the road no map could show, and the quiet loyalties that keep people tethered to one another when the world goes out. Listen closely. The mountain is still holding its breath. The morning had begun like so many others in the quiet mountain town of Cedar Hollow. Sunlight spilled down the steep ridges, catching on tin rooftops and glinting off windshields parked neatly along Main Street. By midday, the town hummed with the small rhythms of a summer Saturday. Screen doors creaking open and shut, the smell of bread drifting from the bakery, dogs barking at children who darted past with dripping ice cream cones. To anyone watching, it looked like a place where nothing dangerous ever happened, where time moved slower than the clouds rolling over the peaks. Yet, somewhere just beyond the boundaries of safety, the mountains stood, ancient, restless, whispering secrets to anyone daring enough to listen. At the edge of town, 4 boys gathered near the cracked basketball court that doubled as their meeting ground. Their bicycles leaned in a messy pile against the chain-link fence, their voices a tangle of laughter, dares, and arguments that rose and fell like the summer breeze. Ethan was the first to speak above the noise. He was 12, the oldest of the group, his hair a sun-bleached tangle that curled over his brow. There was something in the way he carried himself, a restless energy, shoulders squared as if already leading a team into battle. He had a habit of narrowing his eyes when thinking, as though he was looking far past what others could see. Brave, yes, but with a streak of recklessness that his mother often feared. Beside him, Caleb crouched low on the curb, sketchbook open on his knees. He was smaller, quieter, with dark hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes. He rarely spoke unless pressed, but his silence was not empty. It was filled with a keen awareness that caught details the others missed. A leaf's vein, the tilt of a bird's wing, the shadow of a cloud. Everything ended up on the worn pages of his notebook. Jonah, lanky and quick-tongued, sprawled on the basketball court as if it belonged entirely to him. He was always in motion, flipping his cap backward, bouncing a pebble against the pavement, tossing jokes to cover the insecurities that lurked just beneath his grin. He could make the others laugh in almost any circumstance, but sometimes when the laughter died, his eyes betrayed a fear of being left out, of being forgotten. And then there was Miguel, the youngest at 10, whose round cheeks still held a trace of childhood softness. He looked up to the others with a loyalty that never wavered, though fear often tightened his small hands on the handlebars of his bike. He followed them, not because he was brave, but because he could not stand the thought of being left behind. In his presence, the group softened. Ethan's sharpness dulled. Jonah's teasing grew gentle, and Caleb's silence opened into quiet reassurances. They were 4 different notes, bound together into one chord. The court buzzed with the familiar sound of their teasing. "Bet you can't ride all the way to the river without falling, Miguel," Jonah called out, his grin wide. Miguel flushed. "I can too." "Sure you can," Ethan interrupted, tossing a small stone into the dirt. "But Jonah won't even try, because he knows he'd wipe out first." That earned him Caleb's small smile, rare but warm, and Jonah groaned in mock offense before lunging at Ethan with playful shoves. It was ordinary, the kind of afternoon no one would remember in detail. And yet underneath their laughter, a quiet pull threaded through all 4 of them, a hunger for something beyond cracked sidewalks and the safety of Main Street. They had all felt it in different ways. Ethan in the emptiness, left by his absent father. Caleb in the silence of his small, cluttered home, where his mother worked 2 jobs. Jonah in the sting of teachers who called him a class clown, without ever seeing past it. Miguel in the ache of being the youngest, forever trying to prove he belonged. They never said it outright, but each knew. Together, they were braver. Together, they could chase the edge of the world. The afternoon stretched long and golden, cicadas humming in the heat. Mothers called from porches, telling children to wash up for supper. Fathers mowed lawns, sweat staining their shirts. A car horn honked, a dog barked, someone tuned a guitar from an open window. The town held them, safe in its palm, at least for now. And yet, as the boys mounted their bikes, Ethan's voice cut through the air. "Let's go. Let's see what's out past the ridge today." There was no hesitation. Caleb tucked his sketchbook under his arm. Jonah rolled his eyes but grinned as he pedaled forward. Miguel glanced back once toward home, toward the warm square of light in his mother's kitchen window, then set his jaw and pushed off. The 4 of them streamed down the road like a single shadow, wheels spinning, laughter echoing, dust rising behind them. Above, the mountains loomed, and though the town still glowed with safety, a storm was already gathering in the silence of the sky. The road out of Cedar Hollow curved like a ribbon of dust, carrying the boys away from the chatter of porches and the clatter of dishes being set for supper. Tires crackled against gravel, a steady rhythm that matched the restless thrum in their chests. Sunlight fell in fractured pieces through the branches arching overhead, dappling their arms and faces as they pedaled side by side. A small brigade on bicycles that rattled with loose chains and squeaky brakes. They knew every inch of this stretch. The first landmark was the old Carter barn, its roof sagging, wood eaten through by time and termites. Jonah rose from his seat and pointed dramatically as they passed. "Behold, gentlemen," he announced in a mock grand voice, "the ancient ruins of civilization." Ethan snorted, swerving just enough to spray him with a line of dust. "One day, that thing's gonna collapse on your head if you keep hanging around it." "I'm not dumb enough to hang around it," Jonah said, but his grin betrayed that he just might, if only for the thrill. Miguel lagged a few feet behind, his eyes wide as he looked at the barn's black windows, hollow, watching. He pressed harder on his pedals, not wanting to be the last one when they rode by. The road dipped, leading them toward the river. They slowed as the sound of rushing water grew louder, the cool scent of moss and stone replacing the dusty air. Caleb coasted to a stop, leaning on his handlebars, gaze fixed on the water flashing silver between rocks. He opened his sketchbook, quick strokes of pencil bringing the riverbank to life on the page. Ethan circled back, impatient. "You can't stop every 5 minutes, Caleb. We're not going to make it past the ridge at this pace." Caleb didn't look up. Rivers don't stay the same. This one looks different today. The light's sharper. See that reflection? Jonah groaned dramatically. You sound like my English teacher. Next you'll be writing poems about rocks. But Miguel leaned closer, peering at the page. It really does look like the river, he said softly. Like it's moving. Caleb's lips curved in the faintest smile. Recognition from Miguel meant more than Jonah's endless teasing or even Ethan's grudging respect. He snapped the sketchbook shut and tucked it back under his arm. Okay, let's go. They rode on, following the dirt trail that wound beside the water, then split into smaller paths through the trees. The air grew denser, cooler, carrying the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Somewhere high above, a hawk cried, its voice cutting the sky. Jonah was the first to break the silence. So, anyone else in trouble at school? Or is that just me? His tone was light, but there was an edge beneath it. Mr. Thompson gave me detention again. Said I don't take life seriously. Like I'm supposed to be serious about fractions. Ethan laughed. Maybe if you didn't turn every math problem into a joke. That's my charm, Jonah shot back, though the shadow in his eyes didn't lift. His words tumbled out like pebbles, hiding something heavier. Ethan's grin faded. At least you got a teacher who talks to you. Mine doesn't even notice when I'm there. Not that it matters. My dad says school's a waste of time anyway. He doesn't even come home long enough to check my grades. The bitterness slipped out sharp, surprising even him. No one answered right away. The only sound was the crunch of tires on dirt, the river fading behind them. Caleb finally spoke, voice quiet. Sometimes it's easier being invisible. At least no one expects you to say the right thing. Jonah glanced at him, startled by the honesty. Miguel, who had been struggling to keep pace, blurted out before he lost courage. I don't want to be left behind. Not by school, not by you guys, not by anyone. His cheeks flushed as he said it, but the words hung in the air, raw and true. Ethan slowed his bike just enough to match Miguel's speed. He didn't tease, didn't laugh. Instead, he reached over and tapped the younger boy's shoulder. You're not getting left behind. Not with us. The others nodded, silent but sure. In that small gesture, something unspoken bound them tighter than before. The trail narrowed as they rode deeper, weaving between trees whose trunks twisted like watchful sentinels. The laughter of town felt far away now, replaced by the hush of branches rubbing against each other and the distant crack of something falling in the woods. Jonah whistled low. It's like a whole other world out here. It is, Caleb murmured, scanning the canopy as though he were memorizing every line. His fingers itched for his pencil, but he kept riding. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, a high-pitched call that echoed strangely among the trees. It wasn't the hawk, nor any bird they knew. It rose, fell, then repeated, an eerie rhythm that didn't belong to the ordinary forest chorus. Miguel jerked his head toward the sound. What was that? Probably just birds, Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction. Birds don't sound like that, Caleb replied, his brows knitting. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was as if something, or someone, was calling them deeper, threading curiosity through their veins. The boys exchanged glances. Jonah raised his eyebrows, daring. Well, do we go see what it is? Or do we pedal back home and tell everyone we were scared off by a pigeon? Ethan grinned despite the unease. We go. Miguel swallowed hard, but nodded, because the thought of being left alone was worse than any strange sound. And so, with the sun dipping lower and the sky beginning to cloud over, the four of them leaned forward, bikes rattling as they sped toward the call that echoed like a secret, waiting to be uncovered. The forest closed around them, branches arching like a gate. None of them noticed how quiet the birds had grown, or how the wind had begun to shift. Something was waiting. The deeper the trail wound into the woods, the more it seemed the forest swallowed their voices. The boys' laughter, once loud and unrestrained, faded into a hush. Tires rolled over damp earth, snapping twigs that echoed sharper than expected in the quiet. Sunlight thinned beneath the canopy, filtered through branches that leaned close, as if conspiring against them. It wasn't frightening. Not yet. Just different. The kind of silence that pressed at the ears, where every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves, the creak of bike chains, the uneven rhythm of their breathing. Even Jonah, usually quick with jokes, rode without words for a while, his eyes darting to the shadows between trees. Ethan broke the silence first, his voice lower than usual. Feels like the forest is watching. Miguel shivered, his small hands gripping the handlebars tighter. Can it do that? Jonah forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. Yeah, sure, Miguel. The trees have eyes. Didn't you know? But no one laughed with him this time. The air felt heavier, the path narrower, the ground damp, as though the forest had been waiting for rain long before the storm even thought of coming. Caleb slowed, letting his bike drift to a stop. The others skidded to a halt a few feet ahead, looking back at him. He was already pulling out his sketchbook, his fingers smudged with pencil from earlier. What now? Ethan asked, half annoyed, half curious. There, Caleb said simply, pointing to a branch that curved low across the path. Perched on it was a crow, its feathers ragged and slick, as if it had flown through storms unseen. Its head tilted, one dark eye fixed on them. The silence deepened around it, a strange gravity that made Miguel's stomach knot. Caleb's pencil moved fast across the page, lines scratching into form. He caught the shape of the wings, the cruel curve of the beak, the glint in its eye. His hand trembled, though he didn't stop. "Why a crow?" Jonah asked, trying to mask unease. "Couldn't you draw like a rabbit or something less creepy?" Caleb didn't answer. He only pressed harder, the crow's shadow spreading across the paper as if the drawing itself carried weight. When he finally tore his gaze from the page, the real bird had vanished, leaving only the sound of its wings beating once against the heavy air. Ethan leaned over Caleb's shoulder, studying the sketch. He frowned. "It looks wrong, like it knows something." Caleb snapped the book shut, unwilling to explain the unease coiled in his chest. He slid it back under his arm, his silence louder than words. Miguel whispered, "Maybe it was trying to warn us." No one answered, but each of them felt the truth of it settle like mist between their ribs. They pushed onward, slower now. The trail was uneven, roots pushing through the earth like gnarled fingers. The forest seemed older here, untouched by the easy familiarity of the town's outskirts. The air smelled of damp moss and hidden rot. Every so often, a crow's caw echoed faintly, though they never saw it again. Jonah tried to whistle but stopped midway when it sounded too shrill, bouncing oddly through the trees. "Okay," he muttered. "This place is officially creepy." Ethan kept his eyes ahead, jaw tight. He would never admit it, but something about the quiet gnawed at him too. It reminded him of nights waiting for his father to return home. Promises that stretched into silence, broken again and again. He hated silence. It was always too full of things no one wanted to say. Overhead, clouds gathered slowly and heavy. The boys didn't notice. The forest canopy was too thick, the light already dimmed. Shadows stretched across the path, smearing into each other until it was difficult to tell where route ended and rock began. Caleb's pencil itched against the paper again, though he held it still. His sketches weren't just pictures, they were his way of catching the world before it slipped away. And something about this silence, this waiting, begged to be caught. Miguel's voice trembled. "Do you think? Has anyone else heard that sound? The bird calls?" Ethan glanced at him. "It doesn't matter if they did. We heard it. That's what matters." Jonah groaned. "You say that like it's some kind of destiny." Ethan didn't reply. He just pedaled harder, as if trying to outrun whatever truth lingered in his own words. The trail opened briefly into a clearing. Grass grew patchy here, interrupted by the charred remains of what might once have been a campsite. Blackened stones formed a broken circle. A rusted tin can lay half-crushed in the dirt. "Looks like people were here before," Jonah said, relief flickering in his voice. "See? Nothing magical. Just some old campers." But Caleb's gaze snagged on the edges of the stones, the way the moss grew over them, as though the earth was slowly swallowing the memory whole. He crouched down, brushing fingers across the blackened rock, and felt a chill run through him. Miguel tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Can we go back now?" Ethan hesitated, the weight of leadership heavy, even though he'd never asked for it. His eyes traced the path ahead, where the trees knitted closer together, branches bending like arms interlaced. It looked darker there, but also inviting, in a strange way, as if whatever had made that call was still waiting for them to come closer. "We're already this far," Ethan said finally. His voice carried a mix of stubbornness and something quieter, longing. "We can't stop now," Jonah muttered under his breath, but followed. Caleb rose, slipping his sketchbook back beneath his arm. Miguel lingered last, his small figure trembling. But when Ethan looked back at him, Miguel forced his feet forward. The forest swallowed them again. Above, the first low grumble of thunder rolled across the sky. It was muffled by branches, barely noticed. But it was there. The first hint of something breaking loose. The boys didn't see it, and couldn't yet feel the storm gathering. All they knew was the pull of the trail, the sense that the forest had shifted from something ordinary to something alive, holding its breath. Somewhere deep in the shadows, a crow cried once, sharp and solitary. And though none of them spoke it aloud, each boy felt the same thought whisper through his mind. Something is waiting. The forest had grown still, as though the world itself held its breath. The boys rode deeper, their bicycles rattling across roots and patches of damp earth. Their earlier laughter, a distant echo. Then, from far above the ridges, thunder uncoiled, a long, rolling growl that made Miguel's hands tighten on the handlebars. They froze, all four bikes squealing to a stop. The sound didn't fade quickly. It lingered, reverberating through the trees until even the air seemed to tremble. Jonah tilted his head back, squinting at the narrow slice of sky visible through the branches. That didn't sound far away. "It's just thunder," Ethan said, though his voice carried less conviction than he intended. He wanted to sound unshaken, to keep them moving. But thunder like that didn't belong to a passing summer storm. It belonged to a building. Another rumble followed, closer this time, and the first drops of rain spattered the dust, dark circles spreading on the path. Miguel flinched as one hit his cheek, cold against his warm skin. Within moments, the rain thickened. It fell in sheets that blurred the trees and slicked the earth beneath their tires. The forest, once only quiet, now roared with the sound of water pelting leaves and branches, snapping under sudden gusts of wind. "Keep going!" Ethan shouted over the noise. He leaned forward, pushing his bike harder, his voice urgent. "We can't stop here. We'll get soaked." Jonah let out a strangled laugh, part bravado, part fear. "Newsflash, we're already soaked." Caleb's sketchbook, tucked under his shirt, pressed uncomfortably against his ribs, the pages dampening with sweat and rain. He gritted his teeth and pedaled faster. The storm descended with a fury that felt personal, as if it had been waiting just for them. Wind clawed at their shirts, lifted their hair, pushed against the wheels so hard that each pedal felt like a battle. Then came the lightning. It split the sky in a jagged streak, bright white against the suffocating gray. For an instant, the forest lit up like daylight. Every leaf, every raindrop suspended in dazzling clarity. The boys' faces flashed pale and wide-eyed, shadows etched across their features. The thunder followed immediately, a crack so loud it shook the ground beneath their tires. Miguel screamed, his voice swallowed by the storm, and nearly lost his grip. "Stay together!" Ethan yelled, but even he could feel panic clawing at his chest. The trail was turning to mud beneath them, the packed earth unraveling into slick patches that caught at their wheels. Jonah's bike skidded sideways, and he let out a curse, nearly toppling. Caleb grabbed his arm just in time, steadying him, their hands slick with rain. Branches broke overhead, crashing to the ground with violent snaps that sounded like gunfire. One fell just feet from Miguel, sending up a spray of mud. He swerved wildly, his bike fishtailing. "Ethan!" he cried, terror high in his voice. Ethan skidded to a stop and darted back, grabbing the younger boy's handlebars, steadying them both. Mud splashed up his legs, soaking through his shoes, but he didn't care. Miguel's lip trembled, his small chest heaving. "It's okay," Ethan said quickly, gripping his shoulder. "I've got you. Just hold on, okay? Just hold on." Miguel nodded, though tears mixed with rain streaked his face. Another flash tore through the sky, closer this time. The thunder crashed so hard it rattled their bones. The boys were far from home now, too deep in the forest for the town's lights to guide them back, too far for their mothers' voices to call them in. The path ahead blurred under the onslaught of rain, turning into a twisting mess of shadows and water. Jonah spat mud from his mouth, his eyes wide. "We have to find somewhere to hide, now." Ethan looked around, his breath loud in his ears. Trees swayed like giants in the wind, threatening to topple. Every direction looked the same, endless trunks, endless shadows. His pulse pounded, not just from fear, but from the responsibility that sat like a stone on his shoulders. Caleb pointed ahead, his voice sharp and certain despite the storm. "The ridge. There's cover there. I saw it earlier." Ethan didn't question him. "Go, now!" They forced their bikes forward, wheels churning through mud, rain blinding their eyes. The storm seemed determined to push them back, to swallow them whole. Miguel's bike slipped again, and Ethan nearly lifted it half the way, gritting his teeth as his muscles burned. Jonah cursed under his breath, each pedal stroke a fight. Caleb kept glancing at the sky, as though the lightning might strike any second. The forest no longer felt like the woods they had known since childhood. It felt alive, hostile, each gust of wind a shove, each crack of thunder a warning. The rain stung like needles against their skin, plastering their shirts to their backs. Another branch snapped and crashed behind them, the sound sending a shockwave through their hearts. Jonah's voice cracked. "We're not going to make it." "Yes, we are," Ethan barked, though his own fear was chewing at the edges of his resolve. Just keep moving. The trail curved sharply, vanishing into thicker trees. For a moment, they lost sight of each other in the sheets of rain, shadows darting like ghosts between trunks. Caleb's pencil slipped from his pocket and vanished into the mud, but he didn't stop to pick it up. He just kept his sketchbook clutched tight, his lifeline to the world outside this storm. The lightning struck again, close enough that the smell of ozone burned in their nostrils. The sky split, thunder slamming down like the earth itself had cracked in two. Miguel sobbed openly now, his legs pumping weakly. But he stayed on the bike, because Ethan's hand was still on his shoulder, guiding him, refusing to let go. The panic had begun. Not just the fear of the storm, but the realization that they were no longer in control, that the woods, the weather, the very ground beneath their wheels had turned against them. And somewhere, through the roar of rain and wind, came the low groan of something larger. Rock shifting, earth loosening. The storm was only beginning, and the mountain was listening. The storm pressed against them with merciless weight, a wall of rain and wind that turned every breath into a struggle. Mud splashed high as the boys forced their bikes forward, eyes stinging, lungs burning. Then, Miguel's bike struck a root hidden beneath a pool of water. His front wheel jerked sideways, and he tumbled hard into the muck, his cry sharp and frightened. His small frame hit the ground with a splash, mud streaking his arms and face. "Miguel!" Ethan shouted, skidding to a stop. He dropped his bike without hesitation and reached down, pulling the younger boy to his feet. Miguel's lip quivered, his legs trembling. He clutched Ethan's sleeve with muddy hands. "I can't," he began, choking on the words. "Yes, you can." Ethan cut him off firmly, gripping his shoulders. His own voice shook, but he kept it steady enough to matter. "You're not stopping here. Look at me. We keep going." Miguel nodded, though his tears mixed with the rain until neither could tell the difference. It was then Caleb's voice cut through the roar. "There. Look." He pointed with a pale hand, his hair plastered to his forehead. Through the curtain of the storm, a dark hollow yawned at the base of the ridge, a jagged mouth of stone, half hidden by vines and brush, but unmistakable. A cave. "Go," Ethan barked. He half-lifted Miguel toward it while Jonah grabbed the boy's bike and dragged it along, cursing under his breath. Caleb pushed forward too, his sketchbook clutched against his chest, as though it held his beating heart. The opening loomed closer, wide enough to swallow them whole. The rain lashed harder, pushing them faster, herding them like prey. One by one, they stumbled into the shadowed entrance, gasping as the sound of the storm dulled to a muffled roar. Water streamed from their clothes, dripping onto the stone floor. The sudden change, the shift from chaos to quiet, was so jarring that for a moment they could only stand there, breathing hard, hearts pounding in unison. Jonah was the first to laugh, though it came out brittle, too sharp. He dropped Miguel's bike with a clatter and threw his arms out dramatically. "Gentlemen, we have found the Hilton of Cedar Hollow. 5 stars, all-inclusive rain protection." Ethan managed a grin, though it was thin and quick. "Shut up, Jonah." But Miguel's small giggle escaped anyway, a hiccuping sound that loosened the knot in their chests. Even Caleb let out a shaky exhale, his pencil hand trembling slightly as if itching to capture the jagged arch of stone overhead. They sank onto the damp ground, legs aching, lungs still catching up. Their laughter, short, nervous, bounced off the cave walls and returned to them warped, strange, as if other voices had joined in. Miguel shivered and hugged his knees to his chest. "It's cold," he whispered. "It's better than being out there, Ethan said, though he rubbed his arms too, feeling the chill seep into his bones. The cave stretched back farther than their eyes could follow, shadows curling into deeper dark. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, each drop echoing louder than it should have. The air was damp, tinged with a mineral tang that clung to their tongues. Jonah picked up a small stone and tossed it toward the darkness. It clattered, skipped, then fell silent. The echo that followed lingered unnaturally long, rolling back toward them like a low murmur. He swallowed. Okay. That's creepy. Caleb tilted his head, listening. It's the shape of the cave. Sound bends here. His explanation was steady, but his eyes stayed fixed on the blackness, as though it might answer back. Miguel pressed closer to Ethan, his small fingers digging into the older boy's sleeve. Do you think? Is it safe? Ethan hesitated. He wanted to lie, to say yes, to banish the fear in Miguel's voice. But the echo still shivered in his ears, the air too heavy for comfort. Safe enough, he said finally. Jonah forced another laugh, trying to lift the weight pressing down on them. Come on, we're in a real cave. Kids back in town are probably still stuck playing checkers. We're legends. His words hung hollow in the damp air. No one corrected him, but none of them truly believed it either. They shifted closer together, instinct pulling them into a tight circle. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the trees, but inside the cave it was another kind of storm, quieter, unseen, waiting. Miguel laid his head on Ethan's shoulder, eyelids fluttering with exhaustion. Caleb opened his sketchbook again, fingers smudging the wet pages as he tried to outline the cave's jagged arch. But the lines came out uneven, his hand trembling with something more than cold. Jonah leaned back against the stone wall, listening to the steady drip, drip, drip from above. Feels like this place is alive, he muttered, without meaning to. Ethan looked around. The slick stone, the shadows curling like breaths, the echo that didn't belong. He didn't say it out loud, but the same thought tightened in his chest. The storm outside roared on, tearing branches from trees, flooding the paths they had once biked. The cave shielded them, yes. But as the last flicker of lightning lit up the entrance, it cast long shadows across their faces, shadows that stretched far behind them into the darkness. They had found shelter. But shelter, they would learn, doesn't always mean safety. At first, the cave felt like a blessing. The storm's rage was muffled beyond its stone mouth, the lightning and thunder softened by walls that held steady against the wind. The boys huddled close, listening to their own breathing rather than the roar outside. But as minutes bled into an hour, the storm did not ease. If anything, it grew angrier, hammering the ridge with renewed force. Rain drove against the mountainside so hard that the sound became a dull roar in their ears. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, water began to creep into the cave. It started with a trickle, winding its way across the floor in thin silver streams. Miguel, the smallest, was the first to notice. He pulled his knees tighter against his chest, whispering, "It's wet. It's coming in." Ethan leaned forward, frowning as he traced the trickle with his eyes. "It's just rain. It'll drain off." He wanted to believe it, needed to, but the water didn't stop. It thickened into rivulets, finding every groove in the rock, spreading wider until their feet sat in shallow pools. Jonah tried to shake it off with humor. "Guess we're getting free pedicures, huh?" His laugh bounced against the stone, too loud, too forced. No one joined him. The echoes made his own voice sound strange, like someone else was laughing far back in the cave. Caleb sat silently, his sketchbook closed tight under his arm. His eyes weren't on the water, they were on the ceiling. He had felt it first. A subtle vibration, a low tremor that seemed to run through the walls. Then it came again. A shudder, faint but real. Pebbles rattled loose, pattering softly onto the stone floor. Ethan saw it too, his body going rigid. "Did you feel that?" Jonah glanced up, squinting. "Probably just the storm shaking things. Trees, rocks, whatever." But as if to mock his dismissal, another tremor rippled through the ceiling. This time it was stronger. A fist-sized rock dislodged, striking the ground with a sharp crack that echoed into silence. Miguel yelped and scrambled closer to Ethan, eyes wide with terror. "It's falling! The cave is falling!" "Calm down," Ethan urged, though his own voice cracked at the edges. He pulled Miguel against his side, shielding him with an arm. His heart hammered against his ribs. Caleb's gaze stayed fixed upward, his breath shallow. "It's not just the storm." Another rumble rolled through the stone. Dust sifted down in soft curtains, clinging to their damp hair and eyelashes. The boys coughed, swiping at their faces, the air suddenly tasting of grit. Then, without warning, the sound came. A deep, grinding roar that seemed to split the earth itself. From the rear of the cave, stone gave way with a shattering collapse. The floor shook violently, nearly knocking them off balance. A wall of dust surged forward, choking and blinding them as rocks crashed into the darkness behind. Miguel screamed, burying his face against Ethan's chest. Jonah flung himself flat against the ground, covering his head with his arms. Caleb squeezed his sketchbook so tightly his knuckles whitened, his eyes locked on the black void where moments before there had been open space. When the roar faded, when the last echo died into silence, the cave seemed to hold its breath again. Dust hung thick in the air, each inhale scratching their throats. Ethan was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. "The back entrance. It caved in." Jonah coughed hard, his laugh shaky and hollow. "Well, one way to make sure no bears sneak up on us." But even he couldn't keep the tremor from his words. Silence answered him. The truth pressed down on all of them at once. What had been a shelter was now a prison. Caleb finally whispered the thought aloud. "We're trapped." No one corrected him. The storm outside roared louder, wind howling against the cave's mouth like a predator circling prey. Water crept further in, soaking their shoes, seeping into their bones. The drip of moisture from the ceiling joined the rhythm, a steady reminder that the mountain itself was not finished moving. Miguel's breathing turned ragged, panic clawing its way up his throat. "We have to get out! We have to!" He tried to scramble toward the entrance, but Ethan caught him, pulling him back. "Wait! We can't run into that storm. We'll get killed." Ethan's words were sharp, desperate. He looked toward the cave's mouth where the rain still fell in blinding sheets, lightning slicing the sky beyond. Outside meant drowning, trees falling, lightning striking. Inside meant this. Jonah wiped grit from his face, his expression twisting. "So what? We just sit here until the mountain buries us alive?" No one answered. Their fear had grown too heavy for words. It pressed against their lungs, turning each breath into an effort. The echoes changed too. Where before their laughter had bounced back warped but playful, now every whisper seemed to linger too long, carrying unease deeper into the shadows. The cave wasn't just a place anymore. It felt alive, listening. Ethan forced himself to sound steady. "We wait. The storm has to end." He looked at each of them in turn, holding their gazes, though inside he felt like a boy trying to play the role of a man. But as more pebbles rained down and water pooled higher around their ankles, his own certainty crumbled. In the silence that followed, fear took on a new shape. It was no longer the quick terror of lightning or the sharp panic of falling branches. It was something deeper, quieter, more suffocating. The knowledge that they were at the mercy of the mountain, and the mountain was not merciful. They huddled together, shoulders pressed close, breath fogging the damp air. No one laughed now. No one dared to. The cave had swallowed their voices whole, and the silence that replaced it was heavier than any storm. The storm outside raged without pause, battering the mountainside with the fury of 1,000 drums. Inside the cave, the boys sat huddled together, their bodies forming a fragile island against the dark. Time had slowed to a crawl. Without the rhythm of daylight, without the guidance of clocks or familiar voices, the minutes stretched wide, each one heavier than the last. Jonah was the first to speak. He sat cross-legged against the cold stone, shivering though he tried to mask it. "Well," he said, voice too loud in the stillness, "at least we don't have to worry about homework tonight." "That's one good thing, right?" His laugh cracked, thin and brittle. The echo bounced back at them, mocking. Ethan forced a smile, but Miguel only buried his face against his knees, his small shoulders trembling. "Jonah," Ethan said softly, "maybe not right now." But Jonah shrugged, trying to keep his mask intact. "What?" "Somebody's got to keep the mood up. You all look like we're at a funeral." Miguel lifted his head, eyes shining with tears. What if it is?" His voice broke, and silence followed. Even Jonah had no words. The storm answered in his place. A gust of wind howled through the cave's mouth, carrying with it the raw scent of wet earth and pine needles. Somewhere outside, a tree cracked and fell, the sound sharp as a gunshot. Miguel flinched so hard his teeth clicked together. Ethan wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "It's not," he whispered firmly, though inside, fear gnawed at him too. He felt like a child repeating the words adults used when they didn't know what else to say. "It's fine. Everything's fine." Caleb, meanwhile, had opened his sketchbook again. The dim light barely reached the page, just the faint glow of lightning filtering in from the cave's mouth, flashing against wet stone. His pencil scratched, tentative at first, then faster. He drew shadows, broken shapes that didn't quite resemble anything, but still carried the weight of what pressed on his mind. Jonah peered over his shoulder. "You're seriously drawing right now?" "It helps me think," Caleb muttered. He didn't look up, his hand moving with urgency. But then, with a sharp snap, the pencil broke. The sound startled them all. Caleb stared at the jagged edge, his face paling as if something far worse had happened. He pressed the broken pencil to the page again, desperate, but it only left uneven scratches. His lips trembled, though he said nothing. He just closed the book and held it tightly, like a secret he was afraid to lose. The storm rumbled on. Ethan kept his face steady, his shoulders squared as though he could shield the others from more than rain and rock. But when Miguel's breathing steadied and Jonah leaned back, muttering half-jokes to himself, Ethan shifted away for a moment. He moved deeper into the shadows, where their eyes couldn't reach him. There, alone, he pressed his forehead against the cold stone wall. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths he had held back for hours. His hands trembled, mud still caked beneath his nails. He squeezed his fists tight until his knuckles whitened, trying to force the fear out of him. But it clung stubbornly. He thought of his father, absent, unreachable, The man who was supposed to teach him how to be strong. All Ethan had were half-remembered words and the hollow space of broken promises. If he were here, would he know what to do? The cave offered no answer. Only the steady drip of water, each drop like a clock counting down. Behind him, Jonah tried again to lift the silence. "Hey, you know what's funny?" His voice wavered, but he pressed on. "We've been begging for adventure all summer. And here it is. VIP tickets to the scariest cave in the county. Front row seats." Caleb didn't respond. Miguel whimpered quietly, curling tighter against Ethan's discarded jacket. Jonah's grin faltered. Tough crowd. No one laughed. The weight of their situation pressed harder with every moment, crushing the air until even Jonah stopped speaking. The cave had its own rhythm now. The drip of water, the distant groan of shifting stone, the muffled thunder outside. Each sound carried meaning. Each one told them they were small, fragile things, in the grip of something far older and more powerful than they could imagine. Eventually, exhaustion began to creep in, dulling their fear into a heavy ache. Miguel's eyes fluttered closed, his small body slumping against Ethan's side. Caleb leaned his head against the damp wall, sketchbook clutched like a talisman. Jonah lay flat, arms spread, staring into the darkness above, as though he could joke with the shadows themselves. Ethan stayed awake the longest. His gaze lingered on the faint silhouette of the cave's mouth, lightning flickering like a dying lantern beyond. He wanted to believe rescue would come, that someone out there was already looking, already tracing their steps. But another tremor shook loose a spray of pebbles from the ceiling, and the sound made his stomach twist. The first night had begun, and it was heavier than any of them could bear. Morning didn't come in the cave the way it did outside. There was no golden light spilling through windows, no birds announcing the day with their bright calls. There was only darkness, a damp and endless gray. The boys stirred slowly, stiff from the cold stone beneath them, their clothes still clinging with the wet from the storm. Miguel was the first to speak, his voice small, cracking like paper. "I'm hungry." The words hung in the stale air, echoing with cruel clarity. Hunger wasn't something they could ignore. It was a reminder of just how unprepared they were. Jonah rummaged through his backpack, though they all knew how little they had brought. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out a single energy bar, squashed and half broken from the ride, and a bottle of water, barely a quarter full. He held them up like a magician revealing his final trick, forcing a crooked grin. "And for tonight's 5-course meal, feast your eyes." The attempt at humor fell flat. Their eyes fixed on the meager offerings, the silence pressing heavier than before. Ethan rubbed his hands over his face, sighing. "We'll split it." Jonah tore the wrapper with exaggerated flourish, but his grin wavered. He snapped the bar into 4 uneven pieces, handing them out one by one. Caleb took his quietly, his fingers brushing crumbs into his palm. Miguel hesitated before nibbling at his piece, chewing slowly as though making it last might change how small it was. The water was next. Ethan unscrewed the cap carefully, lifting the bottle so that each boy could sip in turn. They drank sparingly, lips barely wetting, though Miguel tried to gulp until Ethan gently pulled it back. "That's it," Ethan said firmly. "We have to make it last." Jonah leaned against the wall, his eyes flicking to the cave's mouth where the storm still whispered beyond. "Or maybe we don't. Maybe we just stay put. Someone's bound to find us soon. A search party. Helicopters. The whole works. We just sit tight and wait." He said it with forced confidence, but his eyes didn't meet theirs. Miguel perked up slightly at the thought. They'll come, right? They'll find us? Ethan hesitated. He wanted to say yes, wanted to let Miguel's hope grow into something solid. But something in the pit of his stomach twisted. The woods were wide, the storm was unrelenting, and their bikes had left no trail in the mud. He couldn't afford to wait for a miracle. "We can't just sit here," Ethan said finally, his voice sharper than intended. He pushed to his feet, brushing dust from his knees. "We need to know what's deeper in, maybe another way out. Maybe something." Jonah scoffed, though it was thin. "Deeper? Are you insane? You've seen enough movies, right? People go deeper into caves. They don't come back out." Ethan's jaw tightened. "If we don't try, we'll starve before anyone gets here." The silence that followed was fractured only by Miguel's small voice. I don't want to go deeper." His fingers twisted the hem of his shirt, his wide eyes shining. "What if it's worse?" Ethan crouched down, meeting Miguel's gaze. His tone softened. "We'll be careful. But we can't stay in one place forever. Not if the water—" As if on cue, a sound rippled through the cave. It was faint at first. A low, rushing murmur. The boys stilled, holding their breath. Then it grew louder, unmistakable. Water, moving fast, echoing off unseen walls. Jonah paled. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Caleb pressed his ear to the stone, listening. His face was drained of color. "It's the storm. It's filling the lower parts of the cave." The realization slammed into them. The water wasn't just dripping from above anymore. It was rising from below, searching, reaching. Miguel whimpered, scrambling closer to Ethan. "We're going to drown, aren't we?" "No," Ethan said quickly, though fear clawed at his chest. He looked into the darkness ahead, where the sound grew louder. "Not if we move. Not if we find higher ground." Jonah shook his head, pushing his hair back with shaking hands. "You don't even know what's down there. We could get lost. We could make it worse. Or we could live," Ethan snapped. His voice echoed sharply against the stone, bouncing back at them like a second, harsher version of himself. He drew a shaky breath, lowering his tone. "I'm not waiting here to die." Caleb finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "He's right." His fingers brushed the edge of his sketchbook, though he didn't open it this time. "If the water keeps rising, this place won't be safe much longer." Jonah pressed his back against the wall, muttering curses under his breath. His bravado cracked, leaving only the raw edges of fear. Miguel clutched Ethan's arm, trembling. "Don't leave me." "I won't," Ethan said, pulling him close. "We stick together. Always." The rushing water grew louder, echoing like distant thunder within the stone. It was a promise, a warning, a countdown none of them could ignore. They had shared their last crumbs of food, their final sips of water. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, but it was fear, thick and suffocating, that filled the cave now. Ethan straightened, determination hardening his face. "We'll rest a little, then we move." No one argued, though dread lingered heavily in the damp air. Each boy felt it. The fragile thread of hope stretching thinner by the second, fraying against the roar of water that promised to take it all away. The storm outside was brutal. The storm inside was worse. The cave had grown restless. Every drip of water, every low rumble in the stone seemed louder, sharper, closer. The boys huddled tighter, the meager warmth of their bodies doing little to ease the chill that seeped up from the floor. Jonah tried to mask the fear gnawing at him, drumming his fingers against the wall in uneven rhythm. "You know," he muttered, "this is the part in the story where someone finds a secret tunnel. Like, behind a rock, there's this perfect little door." His laugh was forced, shaky. Any second now, but no tunnel revealed itself, no hidden passageway, only the steady rush of water and the creaks of stone strained under pressure. Caleb sat with his sketchbook closed, head tilted as if listening to something the others couldn't hear. He pressed his palm against the wall, feeling the vibrations. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "It's moving." Miguel frowned. "What's moving?" "The mountain." Caleb's eyes didn't leave the stone. "It's not solid. It's breathing." Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. At first, it was subtle, a shiver that rattled through their bones. Then it grew. The cave groaned, the sound so deep it seemed to come from the earth's heart. "Down!" Ethan shouted, but the warning came too late. A violent crack split the air. A boulder dislodged from above, smashing against the floor with a deafening crash. Dust exploded into the air, thick and choking. Smaller rocks tumbled after, ricocheting off the walls like shrapnel. The cave screamed with noise and movement, and for a terrible moment, it felt as though the entire mountain was coming down. The boys dropped to the ground, arms covering their heads, lungs burning with grit. Miguel sobbed into his sleeve, his body pressed flat against the cold stone. Jonah cursed, his voice hoarse, lost in the roar. Caleb coughed violently, each hack rattling his chest, his thin shoulders shaking with the force of it. "Caleb!" Ethan scrambled toward him through the dust. He grabbed Caleb's shoulders, pulling him close, steadying him. Caleb's eyes were wide, streaming tears from the choking air. Ethan pressed his face close, speaking loudly over the chaos. "Breathe with me. Slow. Just slow." He demonstrated, dragging air into his lungs despite the grit, then exhaling steadily. He squeezed Caleb's shoulders until the boy's breaths matched his own, ragged but less frantic. The dust hung heavy, turning the cave into a ghostly haze, their outlines blurred in the dim light, shadows of 4 boys caught in the grip of something far older than them. When the last of the rocks settled, silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. This one was final, heavy, crushing. The back passage was gone, where once a narrow stretch of darkness had offered the possibility of escape. Now there was only a jagged wall of collapsed stone. The air tasted like chalk, the smell of broken earth thick in their noses. Jonah wiped at his face with a trembling hand. Tell me that wasn't what I think it was." Ethan looked at the wall of rubble, his stomach turning cold. He couldn't lie, not now. His voice came out low, hollow. "It's sealed," Miguel whimpered, his small hands clawing at Ethan's arm. No, we can still... They'll dig us out, right? They'll come." His words tumbled in panic, as if saying them faster could make them true. Ethan pulled him close, though his own throat ached with fear. Hey, we're okay. We'll figure it out." But the words felt thin, paper against stone. Caleb leaned against the wall, his breathing uneven. He glanced down at his sketchbook, clutching it like a lifeline. His pencil had snapped earlier, leaving only jagged wood, but he held it anyway. The pages were smudged with charcoal fingerprints, as if they carried all the weight of what he couldn't say. Jonah kicked at a loose rock, the sound sharp in the stillness. "We're trapped." His voice cracked. "We're actually trapped." He laughed suddenly, but it was a hollow, broken laugh. "Great adventure, huh? This is the part where they find our bikes and say, 'Guess the kids didn't make it.'" "Stop!" Ethan snapped. His voice was harsher than he meant, but his hands trembled. "Don't say that. Not in front of Miguel." Miguel's wide eyes darted between them, his breath quick and shallow. "We're not gonna die here." "We can't." Ethan crouched down so he was level with him. His own fear simmered under his skin, but he forced his voice steady. "We're not. Not if we stay calm. Not if we stick together." He looked at each of them, trying to anchor them with his gaze. "Together, remember?" The words hung there, fragile but necessary. The storm still raged beyond the cave, water rushing louder now, but it was the silence after the collapse that pressed hardest on their hearts. The finality of stone, the weight of being cut off. For the first time, they understood the truth that had been circling them since the first drop of rain fell. The cave had not been a refuge, it was a cage, and the mountain wasn't done with them yet. In Cedar Hollow, the storm had shaken every window and rattled every rooftop, but it wasn't until dusk settled that the true weight of its damage was felt. Families had called their children in, lamps glowed in kitchens, and dinner plates clinked softly. One by one, parents noticed what was missing. 4 bicycles that hadn't returned, 4 chairs at the table left empty. By the time the clock on the courthouse struck 7, unease had thickened into alarm. Phones rang unanswered. Neighbors checked porches, garages, and basements. The boys were nowhere. The sheriff's office, usually quiet after hours, became a gathering point. Light spilled onto the rain-slicked street, voices crowding the night air. Mothers arrived first, driven by instinct. Fathers came close behind, their attempts at calm already fraying at the edges. Miguel's mother, Rosa Alvarez, pushed through the doorway, clutching her son's small backpack. It was the one he always carried, frayed at the straps, with a keychain shaped like a wooden cross dangling from the zipper. A neighbor had found it abandoned near the basketball court, mud splattered across its surface. Rosa held it to her chest as though warmth might still linger there. Her lips moved silently, prayers too broken to form into full words. Ethan's mother, Dana, paced in front of the desk, her hair plastered damp from the rain. "It's been hours. They should have come home hours ago." Her voice cracked with every word, climbing in pitch until she nearly shouted. "Where are they? Why hasn't anyone found them?" Sheriff Walker stood behind the counter, jaw tight, hands resting heavy on a spread of maps. He was a man used to dealing with drunks and traffic violations, not storms that swallowed children. His radio crackled with static, voices of deputies already scouring the roads, but no clear answers came. Caleb's grandmother, the only family he had left in town, sat hunched in a chair in the corner. Her hands shook violently as she twisted a faded handkerchief, her eyes glassy with fear. She was too old to raise her voice, too frail to storm the sheriff's desk with demands. But the silence of her grief filled the room louder than words. Jonah's father leaned against the wall, arms crossed but trembling. His reputation in town was one of sternness, a man who barked orders louder than most fathers. But now, his lips pressed so tightly they blanched white, his shoulders rigid against the weight of helplessness. Every so often, he rubbed his forehead with the heel of his palm, muttering, "He's smart. He's stubborn. He'll be fine." But his eyes betrayed the panic he couldn't admit aloud. The room buzzed with overlapping voices, each rising and falling like waves crashing against one another. They had their bikes. Maybe they went farther than usual. The forest paths are flooding. They wouldn't be that reckless. They're just boys. What if... Enough! Sheriff Walker's voice cut through the chaos. He leaned over the desk, palms flat against the maps. His eyes swept the room, steady but heavy. "We're doing everything we can. Deputies are already out. We'll keep searching until we find them. But I need all of you to stay calm. Panic won't help them. Calm. Dana's voice shook with fury. My son is out there somewhere, maybe hurt, maybe worse, and you want me to be calm? Her words broke, and she pressed her hands over her face. Another mother wrapped arms around her shoulders, both women trembling together. Rosa Alvarez clutched Miguel's backpack tighter, her tears finally spilling over. He's just a boy. He still sleeps with the light on. He gets scared in the dark. Her voice dissolved into sobs, the cross keychain swinging back and forth like a pendulum of grief. The sheriff's secretary, a woman who had known these boys since birth, slipped quietly into the corner and began making a list. Their names, their last known location, what they had been wearing. Each detail felt like a thread tying them back to life, something tangible to cling to. In the lull between shouts, the sound of the storm pressing against the windows filled the room. Rain beat steadily, like a relentless clock counting the seconds. Thunder cracked, rattling the glass, and the mothers flinched as though the sound itself carried news. A deputy burst through the door, shaking water from his hat. No sign along the east ridge. The river's too swollen to cross. His words landed like stones. The search grid shrank. Time stretched thinner. Rosa rose suddenly, her voice raw. Then search the caves. The boys, Ethan, he likes to explore. He would have gone there. Sheriff Walker looked at her sharply. He knew she was right. The caves were dangerous even on the best days. In a storm like this, they could be deadly. His silence was answer enough. The mothers' voices rose again, pleading, demanding, breaking. The fathers tried to steady them, but their own fear cracked their words. In the center of it all, Miguel's backpack slipped from Rosa's arms and landed on the floor with a dull thud. She sank to her knees beside it, clutching it to her chest once more, rocking gently as tears streaked her face. The sheriff bent over the maps, his finger tracing the forest trails, the ridges, the dark veins of cave systems etched faintly on the page. His voice was low, grim, but resolute. We'll find them. We don't stop until we do. But in the hearts of the mothers, standing in that storm-lit room, hope was already fraying. Their voices, their sobs, their prayers, all of it was the sound of desperation, echoing into the night like a plea the mountain itself might choose to ignore. The rain had not let up. It fell in endless sheets, turning Main Street into a mirror of rippling water, swallowing voices, blurring lights. Yet through the storm, the town moved with a purpose it had never known before. Pickup trucks lined the courthouse square, headlights cutting through the downpour. Their engines idled like restless hearts, exhaust curling into the wet night. Sheriff Walker stood at the center of it all, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He had dragged a folding table out beneath a street lamp, its surface slick with water, and spread the maps wide across it. The edges curled in the damp, but his hands held them steady. His voice, gravel rough, carried over the roar of the storm as men and women pressed closer, huddled beneath coats and ponchos. We search in teams of 4. Each group takes a sector: river, ridge, Old Quarry Road, the Southern Trail. Report in every 30 minutes. He pointed to marks on the map, his finger jabbing at the lines like commands carved in stone. The caves are priority. If they went in there, his voice trailed, grim, and everyone understood without him finishing the thought. A deputy opened the trunk of a patrol car, handing out radios one by one. The static hissed as they were tested, each crackle another reminder of how fragile communication would be in the storm. Flashlights followed, long beams slicing the rain, cutting pale tunnels into the dark. The K9 units barked eagerly, straining against their handlers' leashes. Their breath steamed in the cold night air, muscles taut, eyes bright with instincts sharpened by training. German shepherds and retrievers padded across the pavement, paws splashing in puddles. Their presence brought both comfort and dread. Dogs could find what humans could not. But sometimes what they found wasn't what anyone wanted to see. Rosa Alvarez stood just beyond the circle. Miguel's backpack clutched tight against her chest. Her lips moved in prayer, her body trembling with the force of it. Other mothers held on to one another, their faces streaked with rain and tears, watching as strangers prepared to march into the storm for their sons. The sheriff caught sight of Rosa and lowered his head briefly, as though taking her desperation into himself. Then he straightened, squaring his shoulders. Every minute counts. They've been out there too long already. A volunteer, one of the older men from the lumberyard, nodded grimly. We'll find them, Sheriff. His voice carried the weight of a promise, though his eyes betrayed the doubt beneath it. The storm pressed hard as the first team set out. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies swallowed by rain. Radios crackled with clipped words. Sector 1 moving out. Sector 3 headed to the ridge. The sound of boots slapping against wet ground, of dogs barking into the night, became the heartbeat of Cedar Hollow. Sheriff Walker leaned over the hood of his truck, scribbling notes on a clipboard, circling areas already covered. He paused often, glancing toward the woods that loomed beyond the square. Dark, impenetrable, waiting. His jaw clenched, his breath steady but heavy. He had walked those woods his whole life. He knew their beauty. He also knew their cruelty. Every wasted hour narrowed the margin between life and death. He didn't say it aloud, but everyone felt it. A deputy returned briefly, soaked through, mud up to his knees. No sign along Quarry Road. The storms washed out every track. He shook his head, water flying from his hair. It's like the forest swallowed them whole. The sheriff didn't flinch. He jabbed a finger at the next area on the map. Then we keep going. Double back. Use the dogs. His tone left no room for pause. The canines strained at their leashes, noses pressed low to the ground. One barked suddenly, sharp and insistent, pulling its handler toward the tree line. The group surged forward, hope sparking for a fleeting moment, only to find an overturned trash bin carried downstream by the flood. Disappointment cracked through the air like thunder. Still, the search continued. The night stretched deeper, the storm unrelenting. Volunteers slipped in the mud, cursed, pulled each other up again. Radios reported in bursts. Nothing yet. Found a bike trail but washed out, moving east. Each negative weighed heavier, like stones piling onto chests already straining for air. At the courthouse steps, the mothers clung to one another, waiting for news. Rosa held Miguel's backpack tighter, whispering his name into the fabric, as though he might somehow hear her through the storm. Dana paced, her eyes fixed on the horizon, every flicker of light in the trees making her flinch with desperate hope. Sheriff Walker lifted his head at last, staring into the black wall of forest. Rain streaked down his weathered face, mingling with sweat. He whispered, almost to himself, but loud enough for the deputy beside him to hear, "Hold on, boys, just hold on." The urgency tightened, not just around the sheriff's maps or the radios buzzing with static, but in the hearts of everyone who stood in that storm. Each wasted hour carved deeper lines into their faces, deeper cracks into their hope. And as the searchers disappeared into the trees, their flashlights swallowed by darkness, the town of Cedar Hollow stood still, listening, waiting, praying against the roar of the storm that threatened to drown everything it loved. The night bled into morning without relief. The storm slowed but did not stop, leaving behind a drenched forest that seemed to stretch forever, every path identical, every sound muffled by the heavy cloak of water and mud. For the men and women trudging through Cedar Hollow's wilderness, the hours had become shapeless, blurred by fatigue and despair. Boots sank ankle-deep into muck. Flashlights, their beams weak in the thick mist, carved narrow tunnels of pale light that revealed little and promised less. Radios crackled intermittently, voices breaking with static, clipped reports of failure. No sign along the ridge. Checked the quarry. Nothing. Tracks washed out. It was the same message, over and over again. Nothing. By dawn, the volunteers had been searching nearly 12 hours straight. Many hadn't slept since the boys first went missing. Their faces sagged with exhaustion, their bodies shivered in wet clothes. Still, they pressed forward, because the alternative, stopping, was unbearable. The forest felt endless. Each ridgeline led to another. Each stream forked into two more, and every shadow looked the same. Some swore the woods had grown larger overnight, expanding to keep the children hidden. The storm had stolen not just tracks, but direction, washing away every sign of where the boys had gone. At one point, Deputy Harris crouched in the mud, his gloved hands sweeping through wet leaves. "Footprints," he whispered. For a moment, hope surged through the group gathered behind him. But when they leaned closer, the prints dissolved under a thin layer of running water, blurred into nothing more than patterns of mud. "They're gone," Harris said, his voice low. He pushed himself upright, eyes hollow. One of the older volunteers spat into the dirt. "This damn rain's erasing them as fast as they can leave them." His words carried a bitter truth that silenced the group. The dogs strained at their leashes, noses darting back and forth, catching scents too faint to follow. They barked occasionally, sharp and insistent, only to circle back in confusion. The storm had washed away more than tracks. It had stolen the very smell of the boys, leaving the canine units chasing ghosts. By noon, tempers frayed. Two volunteers argued over which trail to follow, their voices rising until the sheriff cut them short. "Enough," he barked. His voice was hoarse, but his eyes still burned with command. "Every second we fight each other is a second those boys don't have." The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. The mothers waited at the edge of the square, eyes swollen from crying, arms clutching coats tighter against the chill. They no longer asked questions with every returning deputy. They had learned to read the silence in their faces, the slump of shoulders, the absence of hope. Each time a searcher returned empty-handed, a piece of their hearts sank deeper into despair. Late in the afternoon, a group returned from the northern ridge, soaked to the bone. One of them, a man who had hunted these woods his entire life, lowered his voice to the sheriff as the others stood close. His words carried like a whisper, sharp enough to slice through the damp. "If they're in those caves." He paused, eyes darting toward the mothers standing nearby. "God help them." The sheriff's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. The thought was too dangerous to voice, too cruel to let slip into the ears of the waiting families. But the words hung there anyway, echoing in the minds of every man and woman who heard them. The caves were a labyrinth, twisting, collapsing, stretching deep into the mountain with passages that even the bravest avoided during storms. If the boys had gone in there, finding them alive would take a miracle. Sheriff Walker returned to the hood of his truck, rain dripping from his coat, and marked the maps again. His hands trembled for the first time, though he tried to hide it. He circled areas already searched, then drew darker lines around the caves. His pencil snapped under the pressure. He swore under his breath and grabbed another. Nearby, Rosa Alvarez stood clutching Miguel's backpack like a lifeline. She rocked slightly on her heels, whispering her son's name over and over, her lips cracked and pale. Dana paced like a caged animal, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the tree line, as though sheer willpower might drag Ethan back through it. When the 24th hour came, marked only by the dull toll of the courthouse bell carried faintly over the storm, the rescuers stopped for a moment. Just a moment. They leaned against trees, against trucks, their chests heaving, lungs burning. Some lowered their heads, whispering silent prayers. Others simply stared into the mist as though expecting the forest itself to finally give them back the boys. But the forest remained silent. The rain continued. The woods stretched on. And in the hearts of every searcher, every mother, every father, the same truth pressed heavier with each passing hour. Time was not on their side. The storm had hidden the boys well, too well. And if they truly were inside those caves, as more than one rescuer had whispered with dread, then only God could bring them out again. On the edge of Cedar Hollow, where the last paved street gave way to gravel and the forest pressed close, stood a modest house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. It was quiet, unremarkable, except for the figure lying at the top of the steps, a German shepherd, her coat dark and thick, her muzzle streaked with scars that told of battles most in town never asked about. Her name was Luna. Even at rest, she carried the air of a soldier. Her ears twitched at the faintest sound. Her eyes scanned the horizon as though cataloguing threats unseen. But when she shifted, the limp was unmistakable. A hitch in her back leg, the price of an injury that had never healed properly. Each step carried a shadow of pain, though she bore it with stoic dignity, never whimpering, never slowing more than she had to. The children in town whispered stories about her. Some said she had once fought off a bear. Others said she had belonged to the military, abandoned after a mission gone wrong. Few knew the truth. Inside the house, Officer Mark Daniels moved slowly through his evening routine. Retired now, he carried his own scars, less visible than Luna's, but no less deep. Years as a canine handler had left him with a limp of his own, a back that stiffened in the rain, and a silence that sometimes stretched too long. His wife had passed years earlier, leaving him only with memories and the steady company of the dog he had once pulled from the brink. He stepped onto the porch, the screen door creaking behind him, and lowered himself onto the top step with a grunt. The storm had eased for the first time in hours, the rain reduced to a mist that clung to his jacket. Luna lifted her head, her amber eyes meeting his. "You hear it too, don't you?" Daniels murmured, scratching gently behind her ear where the fur grew thin. Her scars tugged when she moved, one jagged mark running from her nose across the side of her face. It never frightened him. If anything, it made her more beautiful, a survivor's mark etched into flesh. She leaned into his hand, eyes closing briefly, before her head lifted again, scanning the distance. Daniels thought back to the day he first saw her. She had been caged, marked unsuitable for service in bold red letters. The trainers had deemed her broken after a failed exercise left her injured. They had moved on quickly, discarding her to a facility where most dogs never saw sunlight again. But Daniels had seen something in her eyes that day, a fire not yet extinguished. He had signed the papers, loaded her into his truck, and brought her home. That was years ago, yet she still carried herself like she had something to prove, as though waiting for the world to give her one more chance. Tonight, as thunder rolled faintly across the ridges, Luna stirred restlessly, her ears pricked, her nose twitching at the damp air. She rose, limping toward the yard, her body taut with alertness. Daniels watched her, frowning. Easy, girl. Nothing out there but storm and trees. But Luna wasn't convinced. She paused at the edge of the porch, muscles quivering, staring toward the black line of forest beyond the town. She growled softly, low and uncertain, not out of fear, but recognition. Something was wrong. Daniels followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. He had heard the chatter in town all day. The missing boys, the mothers crying in the square, the sheriff's office lit up late into the night. He'd offered to help, but the sheriff had waved him off. We've got dogs already. Rest your leg, Daniels. Now he wondered if Luna knew more than the rest of them. He rose with effort, stepping beside her, his hand brushing her scarred muzzle. Storm's got you spooked, he muttered. But even as he said it, he felt the old pull, the same instinct that had driven him through years of searches, rescues, and nights spent chasing hope through impossible conditions. Luna's ears flicked, her body leaning forward as though straining towards something only she could hear. The forest loomed, silent now, the storm's rage replaced by a waiting stillness. Daniels sighed, rubbing his temple. He was too old for this, too broken. But Luna was waiting for something. He could feel it in the way her body trembled, in the sharp focus of her gaze. She wasn't just a dog scarred by her past. She was a survivor searching for a purpose. And though Daniels didn't yet know it, the missing boys in the mountain were about to become her reason. The storm had lessened by morning, but its aftermath still clung to Cedar Hollow like a bruise. Roads were rivers of mud, ditches overflowed, and the forest exhaled steam beneath a gray sky. Rescue trucks rolled out in long convoys, tires grinding through gravel, headlights cutting the mist. Radios crackled with clipped voices, dogs barked, and men shouted over the din. Luna lay on the porch, her head lifted, ears flicking at every sound. Each bark from the canine units across town made her muscles twitch. She shifted uneasily, her scarred muzzle pointed toward the forest that pressed at the horizon. Her amber eyes followed the movement of every truck, as though measuring their urgency. Daniels stepped outside, pulling his jacket tight against the damp air. His limp was more pronounced this morning, the storm making his joints ache. He sank into the chair beside Luna, his hand dropping to her head. Easy, girl. They've got it handled. But Luna didn't relax. Her ears pricked, nostrils flaring as she tested the wind. Something sharp lingered there, faint, almost buried beneath the smell of wet pine and diesel exhaust, but enough to make her rise to her feet. She padded to the edge of the porch, her limp visible, yet her body taut with purpose. Daniels frowned. "Luna," he warned, his voice firm. She froze, her muscles trembling with the effort to obey. But her gaze didn't shift. Her entire being was turned toward the woods. He followed her line of sight. From this distance, he could just make out the silhouettes of rescuers moving along the ridge road. Flashlights bobbed, radios buzzed. The canine teams barked as their handlers urged them deeper into the wet earth. Daniels recognized their energy, the eager drive of trained dogs searching for a scent. But he also knew their limits. A storm like last night's could wipe away trails, drown smells, twist the ground until nothing made sense. Luna growled low, a sound not of threat, but of urgency. She stepped down from the porch, paws sinking into mud. Daniels sighed, following her, the weight of his cane pressing deep into the ground. "Hey!" a volunteer called from across the road, his voice tired but friendly. "You keeping her inside? Don't want her spooking the units." Daniels lifted a hand in acknowledgement. "She's fine." He tugged lightly at Luna's collar, coaxing her back. She obeyed with reluctance, her body pulling toward the woods, even as she sat back at his feet. "She still hates storms, huh?" the man said, tipping his cap before moving on. Daniels glanced down at her. Her scars caught the grey light, jagged reminders of the training fields where thunder and gunfire had been used to sharpen her nerves until they broke. "Yeah," he muttered. "Storms bring it all back." But what he didn't say was that storms also woke something in her, something deeper than fear. He had seen it before, the way her ears cut through chaos, the way her nose searched for what no one else noticed. It was as if the storm stripped the world bare, leaving only essentials: fear, instinct, survival. This morning, her ears tracked every sound: the echo of trucks on wet pavement, the faint crack of branches breaking underfoot, even the drip of water from the porch roof. Nothing escaped her. Her nose twitched constantly, testing the shifting air currents. She whined softly, frustrated, her gaze locked on the mountains, as though she could already see what the others could not. Daniels crouched stiffly, placing a hand under her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "They don't need you out there," he said firmly, though his own conviction faltered. "Those boys, they've got half the county looking." Luna's tail flicked once, slow and deliberate. She leaned her scarred muzzle against his palm for a moment, then turned her head sharply back toward the forest. Her ears snapped forward, body rigid. Daniels stilled. He heard nothing, only the low murmur of radios, the occasional bark of dogs. But Luna was locked on something. Her nose lifted, sniffing again, longer this time. She growled, just under her breath, and pawed at the earth as if the ground itself demanded to be followed. Daniel's throat tightened. He'd trusted that instinct once before, years ago, when it led him to a lost hiker no one else could find. He'd trusted it again when she had dragged him by the arm out of a collapsed training shed, blood dripping from her muzzle. Her instincts had never failed. But he wasn't a handler anymore. She wasn't official. And the sheriff had made it clear. The search was already covered. Still, as he tightened his grip on her collar, he felt the tremor in her body, the electric hum of instinct begging to be unleashed. She wasn't just spooked by the storm. She knew something. Daniels rubbed his thumb over the scar along her face, his own chest aching with a mix of pride and dread. "What is it, girl?" he whispered. Her only answer was another low growl, her ears straining toward the distant caves hidden in the mountain mist. And though Daniels told himself again that the search teams had it handled, a seed of doubt took root. Because Luna's nose was sharper than any map, any radio, any flashlight cutting the storm's dark, she smelled something they didn't, something alive. By afternoon, the mist had thickened into a steady drizzle, soft but relentless. It clung to every roof in Cedar Hollow, coated every pine needle, soaked every searching boot. In the square, trucks came and went in weary rhythm. Radios sputtered with static, and the mothers still waited with eyes that had lost sleep, but not fear. On the edge of town, Luna would not sit still. She paced the length of the porch, her limp pronounced but her energy relentless, muscles trembling with every step. Her ears twitched toward the mountain, her scarred muzzle lifted to the wind, nostrils flaring. She let out a sharp bark, then another, each one cutting through the rain like a blade. "Easy, girl," Daniels muttered, pulling the leash tighter. His knuckles whitened around the worn leather, his back bent with the effort of keeping her in place. He planted his cane in the mud, bracing himself, but Luna lunged again, nearly pulling him off balance. Her growls rose into frantic barks, echoing through the yard, until neighbors turned their heads. She wasn't barking at shadows. She was calling, demanding. Daniels yanked once, sharply. "Luna, enough!" But his voice, for all its firmness, couldn't reach her. Her body was coiled like a bowstring, every muscle tuned to something only she could sense. The mountain, the caves, the faintest threads of scent washed thin by the storm, but not erased. Something human, something young. She barked again, higher, more desperate. Daniel stumbled forward as she pulled, his cane sinking deep into the mud. His chest burned with the effort. "Damn it, Luna, stop! You'll hurt yourself!" But Luna no longer heard him. Her paws churned the earth, claws digging furrows in the wet ground. Her eyes blazed with focus, her whole body quivering with the urgency of instinct. To her there was no leash, no boundary, no barrier, only the call of life buried in the mountain's silence. Neighbors paused along the road. One volunteer whispered, "She knows something." Another shook his head. "She's just spooked. Old dogs bark at ghosts." Daniels heard both, but Luna's barks drowned them out. She lunged again, harder this time, and his arm snapped forward with the force. Pain shot up his shoulder, but still he held on, gritting his teeth. "No," he rasped, planting both feet. "Not like this. You're not—" Before he could finish, Luna twisted sharply, the move honed from years of training he had nearly forgotten she once endured. She dropped low, rolled her shoulders, and yanked with sudden ferocity. The leash slipped. Daniel's hand clenched at empty air, the leather sliding through his fingers, burning his palm. For a heartbeat, he thought he could catch it. For a heartbeat, he believed she might stop. She didn't. Luna bolted into the rain, her body a dark streak against the pale mist. Her limp vanished in the urgency of motion, swallowed by the sheer will that drove her forward. Mud splashed high with each stride, her scarred muzzle lifted, ears flat against her head as she tore down the road and into the open fields that led to the mountain. "Luna!" Daniel shouted, his voice breaking. He lurched forward, cane slipping in the mud, his knees buckling beneath him. He fell hard onto the wet ground, his chest heaving, pain flaring through old wounds. "Luna, no!" But she was already gone. Her bark carried back through the rain, sharp, relentless, alive. A sound that drew heads in the square, that made the mothers pause their sobbing, that made Sheriff Walker glance up from his maps with a frown. "Whose dog is that?" a deputy asked. Daniels struggled to his feet, mud streaking his jacket, his heart pounding with both dread and pride. He gripped his cane with shaking hands, eyes locked on the dark streak, vanishing toward the ridge. "She's mine," he said hoarsely, "and she's not barking at nothing." The sheriff's gaze followed the sound, his jaw tightening. The storm had stolen so much. Tracks, scents, hope itself, but maybe not everything. Meanwhile, Luna ran. She ran as though every scar on her body had been carved for this moment. She ran with the urgency of one who had been broken and cast aside, yet still carried a purpose burning inside her chest. The rain lashed her face, the mud pulled at her paws, but she didn't falter. The mountain loomed, and she barked again, a sound that seemed to defy the storm itself. In her chest, instinct sang the truth. They were alive, somewhere in the dark, and she was going to find them. The cave had no night or day, only a damp twilight of stone and shadows. Yet the boys knew time was passing. Their bodies told them. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, and the weight of the storm pressed down like a hand that would not lift. By the second night, panic had dulled into exhaustion. They huddled together on the driest patch of ground, jackets clinging wet to their skin, their breaths shallow in the stale air. Miguel trembled against Ethan's side, face buried in his knees. Quiet sobs escaped, despite his efforts to hide them. Jonah noticed first. Without his usual bravado, he draped an arm around Miguel's shoulders, whispering low, "Hey, you're okay. You hear me? You're okay." "I want my mom," Miguel sniffled. "She's probably waiting." Jonah blinked hard. He thought of his own father, cold and disappointed, and for once didn't make a joke. He just tightened his hold. "You'll see her. You're gonna walk out of here, I promise." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe it. He leaned back against the wall and forced his voice steady. "Someone will find us." He repeated it like a prayer. "They'll find us." Caleb sat apart, sketchbook limp in his lap, pages ruined. He traced invisible lines with his finger instead. Miguel's small shoulders, Jonah's fierce attempt at comfort, Ethan's eyes burning under fear. Even without a pencil, he tried to remember, to preserve. The cave magnified every sound, water dripping, stone groaning, their uneven breaths. Jonah kept talking, filling silence with half-stories. "Remember when you fell off your bike, Miguel? Thought you broke your arm, but it was a scrape. You cried louder than this. Then you rode faster than all of us. You don't give up. Not you." Miguel hiccuped a laugh. "I was scared." "Yeah," Jonah said softly. "Me too, every day. But you keep going anyway. That's all we gotta do." Ethan placed a hand on Miguel's knee, steady. "He's right. We'll keep going. We'll hold on. That's how we make it." The silence afterward was still heavy, but warmer, woven with connection. By dawn, thirst carved deeper wounds than hunger. Caleb coughed first, soft at first, then rattling. His skin was pale, slick with sweat despite the chill. "Are you cold?" Ethan asked, already knowing the answer. He pulled Caleb close, feeling the fever's heat. Jonah tried to lighten it. "Don't tell me you're catching a cold here. What's next? Room service?" His smile faltered when Caleb bent double, coughing until dust shook loose from the ceiling. Miguel whimpered, clutching Ethan's sleeve. "What's wrong with him?" "He's just worn out," Ethan lied. "We'll keep him warm." Jonah awkwardly rubbed Caleb's back in small circles. "You'll laugh about this later." But Caleb didn't laugh. His distant eyes glistened with fever. The cave grew colder. Miguel whispered, "I'm scared." Jonah forced a grin Miguel couldn't see. "You know what helps? Singing." "Singing?" Miguel blinked. "Yeah. My mom used to sing during storms." "So, now I'll sing for you." His voice cracked, half-remembered lullabies echoing strange against stone, but it filled the dark. Miguel's body eased. Even Ethan, listening, felt the cave loosen its grip for a moment, but then the water came. A trickle at first, then a sheet spreading across the floor, climbing their ankles with icy bite. "It's rising," Miguel gasped, pulling his feet up. Ethan clenched his jaw, pulling Caleb closer. Heat of fever pressed against cold water. Jonah's voice dropped. "What if it doesn't stop?" "It has to," Ethan whispered, though doubt hollowed his chest. The cave felt less like stone now, more like a throat slowly closing. Caleb coughed until his body shook. His voice rasped. "If we don't make it, I'm sorry for slowing you down." "No," Ethan snapped, gripping his shoulders. "You're not slowing anyone. You're one of us. Always." Miguel whispered, "I'm sorry too. For crying." Ethan looked at them, Caleb fading, Miguel trembling, Jonah's bravado shattered, and despair clawed at him. But he clenched his fists, nails biting his palms, and forced fire into his voice. "No. Stop. We're not done. Not here. We hold on. That's what we do. We don't let go. Not now. Not ever." The words rang harsh against stone, but they carried weight. Jonah's eyes flickered with reluctant belief. Miguel sniffled and clung tighter. Caleb managed the faintest nod. Silence followed. Fragile, trembling, but alive. Morning did not bring light. The cave's bend swallowed any sunrise. The boys woke in the same damp dark, their legs numb from cold water, their stomachs hollow. Caleb coughed weakly, sketchbook still in his lap, though the pages had turned to pulp. Ethan stayed beside him, steadying every shallow breath. Miguel whispered into Jonah's sleeve, "I don't want to die here." "You won't," Jonah said hoarsely. "You'll see your mom again. What if she thinks I didn't try hard enough?" Jonah pulled him closer. "Don't you ever think that. You're the bravest of us." Caleb whispered faintly, "I'm sorry." Ethan's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Don't be. You're here. That's enough." Jonah swallowed, voice cracking. "If anyone asks what we did down here, I'll tell them we didn't quit. That's all that matters." "That's right," Ethan whispered, eyes fierce in the dark. "We hold on." The cave groaned as if listening. The water crept higher, but for the first time since the storm began, the boys had given themselves an answer. They couldn't see it, but far above, a scarred German shepherd was already running through the storm. Her nose cut the wind, her body bled, but never stopped. Instinct pulled her forward, locked onto the faintest trace of their scent. The third morning in the cave was not sunrise. It was darkness, water, and the whisper of children speaking what they thought might be their last words. But it was also resolved, raw, trembling, unbreakable. They would not let go. The forest was drenched, swollen with the storm's fury. Streams that once trickled gently now thundered into torrents, spilling across trails and carving raw scars into the earth. Branches littered the ground, slick with rain, the air heavy with pine and wet soil. For people, the mountain was nearly impassable. For Luna, it was only another battlefield. Her paws struck mud hard, flinging clumps behind her. The limp that slowed her on quiet days was erased by purpose. Her scarred muzzle cut through the mist, ears pinned, nostrils wide. Each breath carried fragments, moss, river water, charred bark from lightning. But beneath it all lingered something fragile. Humans, young, alive. Mud dragged at her legs, but she drove forward, muscles burning. She plunged into a swollen stream, the current cold and violent, dragging her sideways. Luna growled, teeth bared as if she could fight the water itself, and clawed her way to the far bank, hauling herself onto the sodden ground. Behind her, voices shouted through the storm. "Luna! Stop that dog! Daniels! She's gonna kill herself out here!" Boots pounded in the mud, flashlights bobbing between trees. She didn't look back. Their calls were only noise. The mountain's voice was louder. She tore up a ridge, pads splitting on sharp stone. Blood mixed with rain, but her eyes burned with fire. A deputy slipped trying to follow, cursing as his flashlight clattered down rocks. "She's gone mad!" Daniels stumbled after, Kane sinking deep into the muck. His chest heaved as her silhouette vanished into the mist. "Luna!" His voice cracked with fear and pride. "Don't do this alone!" But Luna was already gone. She cut through underbrush, branches tearing at her fur, scraping skin raw. Each sting drove her harder. The mountain loomed above, slopes slick with mudslides, caves yawning like mouths. Her nose twitched, faint residue of sweat, salt of human skin buried in the earth. She barked once, sharp and piercing. The sound ricocheted through the storm like a flare. "She's found something," a rescuer shouted. They followed, panting, stumbling, radios crackling. But no map, no light could match her. She was bound not by reason or fear, but by instinct, and instinct would not rest. She vaulted logs, scrambled cliffs slick with rain, slid down embankments. Pain lanced through her bad paw, but she didn't falter. Each stride was a vow, each bark a command. The mountain resisted. Mud shifted, stones rolled, wind howled. But Luna pressed on. She belonged to storms. She was born for chaos. Her bark rose louder, urgent, undeniable. Rescuers followed, gasping. Daniels trailed far behind, his body burning, his voice hoarse. He stumbled, knees crashing into mud, but forced himself up. "She knows," he whispered. "She knows." Luna's wounds bled, but her nose burned with certainty. The scent grew stronger, threaded with damp earth and fear. She barked again, furious, echoing through the forest. The boys were close. Somewhere in stone and darkness, they waited. She could feel it. She could smell it. She surged forward, tearing through the storm. Behind her, men shouted, boots crashed. But she didn't slow. The mountain had swallowed its prey. Luna would tear it open. The ridges twisted into mist, ravines treacherous with mud. Rescuers slipped, flashlights scattering across wet rock. Radios spat static. Some muttered they were chasing a ghost. Then Luna stopped. At the crest of a hidden ridge, half concealed by brambles and stone, she froze. Her body stiffened. Her ears pricked. For a heartbeat, the forest held its breath. Then she barked. It wasn't frantic. It was thunderous, commanding, splitting the mist in two. Rescuers skidded to a halt. Luna barked again, thrusting her body forward, paws clawing at earth as though she could tear the mountain open herself. "Something's here," a deputy whispered. She dropped low, growling, and began to dig. Mud flew behind her as claws shredded roots, her breath steaming in the cold air. She didn't pause. She knew. Rescuers exchanged uneasy looks. "It's just a hole," one muttered. But Luna barked again, so fierce it froze them in place. She dug harder, her eyes blazing. Then it came, the faintest sound. At first they thought it was her echo. But no, it was different, softer, fragile. A voice. "Help!" The rescuers froze, breath caught in their throats. Another cry followed, muffled but real. A child's voice. Alive. "They're in there," one man whispered, awe breaking his voice. The ridge that had seemed unremarkable now burned with urgency. Rescuers surged forward, crowding the narrow crack Luna uncovered. It was barely a slit in the rock, half hidden by years of mudslides. But Luna had found it. Her barking grew wilder, urging them on. She clawed until her paws bled. Daniel staggered up, falling to his knees beside her. When he heard the faint sob from inside, his eyes filled with tears. "They're alive." Men pressed their ears to the stone. A cough, a whimper, a whisper. "Please." Radios crackled as one called it in. "Sector 4 Ridge. Cave collapsed. Boys alive inside." They didn't wait. Shovels, pickaxes, crowbars were hauled from packs. Hands tore at roots and mud. Sweat mixed with rain as they struck stone. Every swing fueled by faint cries behind the wall. Luna stayed at the front, barking until her throat rasped raw. Each cry inside stirred to her call, answering weakly, spurring the rescuers harder. Daniel stroked her scarred fur, whispering, "You did it. You found them." But she clawed again, eyes blazing. For the first time in 72 hours, hope surged. The mountain had tried to silence its captives, but a scarred dog had forced it to speak. The ridge shook with effort. Men dropped to their knees, mud soaking their jeans, clawing with bleeding hands when tools splintered. Pickaxes swung until sparks flew. Sweat and rain ran down faces, indistinguishable from tears, and always, above the grunts and scraping metal, Luna barked, relentless, rhythmic. A drumbeat in the storm. Inside the cave, Ethan pressed his ear to the damp wall. "Did you hear that?" Jonah lifted his head, weak but certain. "It's digging." Miguel's voice broke with joy. "They found us." Caleb coughed hard, but even he smiled faintly. "Luna," he whispered, though he didn't know how he knew. Outside, the rescuers hacked harder. The crack widened inch by inch, each gained with blood and grit. A deputy swung until his tool snapped, then dug barehanded. "Faster!" someone shouted, though all were already at their limits. Bodies screamed for rest, but hearts roared louder. The boys were alive. Rainwater ran down arms, soaking clothes. Mud-caked knees and faces. They looked more like miners than deputies, but none stopped. Each man carried the same look, fear laced with fire. Luna barked again, pawing furiously, until Daniels pulled her back before she tore herself apart. She twisted, desperate to return, her body shaking but her eyes burning. "Easy, girl," he whispered. "You've done your part." Still she barked, hoarse but unbroken. Then a stone shifted. Not pebbles. A jagged rock loosened under the assault, tumbling inward with a dull thud. A rush of stale air exhaled from the gap. "Again!" Sheriff Walker thundered, shovel biting into the edge. A crowbar forced the crack wider. Inside, dust rained down as the boys flinched. And then, impossibly, a thread of light slipped into the dark. Thin, weak, barely there, yet dazzling. Miguel gasped, reaching as if it might vanish. "Light! It's light!" Jonah laughed, ragged but real. Ethan shook Caleb gently. "See that? I told you. We hold on." Caleb's tear cut a clean line down dirt-caked skin. "It's real." Outside, rescuers shouted, energy renewed. The sliver widened with each strike until it was unmistakable. The mountain had been breached. Men wept openly as they dug harder, tears lost in the storm. One voice cracked with reverence. "By God, they're alive." Daniels pressed his forehead to Luna's scarred head, whispering through tears, "You did it. You brought us to them." Her bark answered, hoarse but fierce, echoing across the ridge like thunder. For the first time in 72 hours, the mountain gave way to light. The crack widened, inch by inch, until the gap yawned wide enough for a man to slip through. A rush of air spilled out, thick, sour, carrying the scent of sweat and fear. "Flashlights ready," Sheriff Walker ordered. White beams sliced into the dark, dust swirling like smoke. A rescuer crawled inside, helmet scraping stone, light cutting across pale faces, huddled against the wall. The boys flinched instantly. After 72 hours in near darkness, the sudden brightness was on fire. Miguel buried his face in Jonah's arm. Caleb coughed weakly. Ethan squinted hard, refusing to look away. "They're alive!" the rescuer shouted, his voice cracking. Relief exploded outside. Men shouting, radios blaring, mothers sobbing at the base of the ridge. Alive. Inside, the rescuer's voice softened. "It's okay, boys. We've got you." He caught Miguel first, the child collapsing into his arms, sobbing against his jacket. Jonah followed, legs shaking, until rescuers pulled him close. His bravado dissolved. He wept into a man's shoulder, held steady by hands that trembled with relief. Ethan lingered, refusing to move, until Caleb stirred. Too weak to stand, Caleb was lifted gently, his fevered head cradled by strong arms. "Light," he whispered. "Yes, son," a rescuer answered. "You'll see the light." One by one, they were passed toward the opening. Miguel clung tight. Jonah stumbled into waiting arms. Caleb carried carefully. Ethan staggering last, his hand still reaching to steady the others. At the base of the ridge, mothers surged forward. Rosa Alvarez seized Miguel, rocking him and sobbing, "Mi hijo, mi hijo." Dana pulled Ethan into her chest, whispering, "I've got you. I've got you." Jonah's father, stern mask broken, kissed his son's dirt-streaked forehead. Caleb was lowered into his grandmother's frail arms. Her trembling hands stroked his hair. "You came back to me." On the ridge, Daniels leaned on his cane, eyes fixed on Luna. Mud-soaked, paws torn, muzzle scarred, she stood tall, ears flicking, chest heaving. He whispered so only she could hear. "You did it, girl. You brought them home." The rescuers had widened the breach enough for the boys to crawl toward the light, but their bodies faltered. Then Luna stepped forward. She lowered her head at the tunnel mouth, steady as stone. Ethan reached first, his trembling fingers gripping her fur. His strength steadied at her side. Caleb's weak hand found her flank, whispering, "Don't let go." Jonah pressed his face into her coat, sobbing into the scent of earth and wet dog. Even Miguel, carried in arms, stretched out to brush her tail as she passed. Step by step, Luna became their rope. Her paws pressed carefully through mud, her body anchoring each boy as rescuers guided from behind. Ethan leaned heavily. Caleb clung. Jonah buried his cheek against her flank. Their whispered mantras, "Don't let go," echoed through the passage like prayers. Outside, the light grew stronger. Radios crackled, rescuers shouted encouragement. "Almost there!" But it was Luna's warmth, Luna's steady pull that carried the boys forward. Then the air shifted, fresher, sharper, filled with pine and rain. Ethan gasped as the breeze struck his face, his knees buckling as though the world's weight had finally lifted. Jonah collapsed to the wet earth, pressing his cheek into the mud, sobbing freely. Caleb stirred faintly in his grandmother's arms, whispering again, "Light." Miguel reached toward his mother's voice before she even touched him. The ridge erupted. Mothers screamed names, rescuers cried openly, strangers held hands. Hardened men who had carried bodies before now wept, because this time the mountain had surrendered life, not death. Luna stood apart, her body raw from the fight, but her eyes steady, her head lifted to the wind. She did not push forward for recognition. She stood guard, sentinel to the miracle she had carved out of stone. Daniels limped beside her, laying a hand on her back. "Stand proud, girl. You did this." Sheriff Walker removed his hat, holding it over his heart. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "Bring them down. Let the town see what hope looks like." Rescuers formed lines, carrying the boys carefully down the ridge. Mothers clutched sons, tears falling freely. Volunteers embraced. Radios relayed the miracle to a waiting world. And at the edge of it all, Luna remained, scarred, mud-soaked, her bark still echoing in memory. She was more than a dog. She was the rope that pulled them out of the dark, the sentinel who refused to let the mountain win. The storm had passed. The forest steamed in pale morning light, and etched into that ridge forever was the promise of a scarred dog. Never again would darkness hold its prey without a fight. The hospital in Cedar Hollow was small, only a dozen rooms, but that night it became a sanctuary. The storm had passed. The mountain had relented, and now the boys lay side by side in crisp white sheets, IVs dripping steadily beside them. Monitors beeped softly, rhythms of survival that reassured the families who refused to leave their sides. Miguel slept deeply, his mother stroking his damp hair with one hand, clutching a rosary with the other. Her prayers were no longer desperate but grateful, whispered through tears. Jonah lay awake, his hand resting limply in his father's. The man who had always seemed steel now sat hunched and broken, tears streaking his face. Every so often he whispered, "I'm sorry, son." And Jonah, too tired to speak, answered with the faint squeeze of his hand. At the far end, Caleb propped against pillows, fever easing. His grandmother's hand rested gently on his knee as she murmured stories from his childhood, weaving memory into a cocoon strong enough to keep him here. When a nurse set a notebook on his tray, his trembling fingers seized the pencil. Slowly, he sketched pointed ears, a scarred muzzle, the fierce stance of a German shepherd. His grandmother's voice caught. "Luna." Caleb only nodded, pressing on until her form was whole on the page. Nearest the door, Ethan lay pale, staring at the ceiling. His mother held his hand, but his eyes shifted when the door creaked. His father entered, rain still dripping from his coat. He hadn't been there during the storm, but he was here now, his shoulders heavy with guilt. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan whispered, hoarse but clear, "Thanks for coming." Not forgiveness, not yet, but the space for it. His father's eyes filled with tears. "I should have never let you feel alone," he said, brushing damp hair from his son's forehead. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the warmth linger, his shoulders easing slightly. The ward was hushed. Prayers, the scratch of Caleb's pencil, the quiet rhythm of boys breathing. Rosa Alvarez rose once, walking from bed to bed, touching each blanket. "Gracias," she whispered. Not to the nurses, not to the sheriff at the door, but to the 4 lives glowing here. Though she was not in the room, Luna filled it. In Caleb's sketch, in whispered stories, in the grip of hands that refused to let go. When Caleb finally finished, he held up the page. The boys recognized her instantly, their eyes wet. "She saved us," he murmured before sleep. The drawing lay across his chest. Luna, scarred and proud. By morning, Cedar Hollow gathered. Farmers, shopkeepers, children clutching their parents' hands. All filled the courthouse square, umbrellas bright against a grey sky. At the center, a podium waited. Behind it, the rescuers stood, faces still lined with exhaustion. And on the courthouse steps sat Luna. Her coat was brushed, though her paws were wrapped in bandages. The scars on her muzzle caught the light. She sat tall, unflinching, ears pricked, as if she had been born for this moment. Daniel stood just behind, one hand resting on her back, uneasy under the weight of so many eyes. Sheriff Walker adjusted the microphone, his deep voice carrying across the square. "Cedar Hollow," he said, pausing for silence. "We have faced storms before. We have faced loss. But this time, we faced the mountain itself. And we won." Cheers rippled, but he raised a hand. His voice broke. "We didn't win because of radios or maps. We won because of this dog." He gestured toward Luna. "Without her, those boys would not be here today." For a moment, the square was utterly still. Then applause thundered, rolling like another storm. People wept openly. Mothers pressed children close, strangers embraced. Daniels muttered, "She doesn't need this." But Luna sat calm, amber eyes steady, as though she understood. Not pride, presence. "She ran through storms that broke men," the sheriff said. "She dug where no one thought to dig. She refused to give up, even when we were ready to. We owe her our children's lives." The crowd erupted again. Rosa Alvarez's voice rose above it all. "Give it to her! She carried them back to us." Children shouted her name. "Luna! Luna!" She flicked her ears, then let out a single bark, sharp and resonant. Laughter and sobs merged as applause rolled on. The sheriff ended with words that would be etched into town memory. "Cedar Hollow will heal from this storm. But we will never forget what saved us. This town will always carry the name of Luna, the dog who refused to let go." When the conference ended, the crowd surged forward. Not to the sheriff, not to the deputies, but to kneel before Luna, to touch her scarred muzzle, to thank her with trembling hands. Through it all, she sat steady, guardian of the town itself. Weeks later, when the bruises had faded and fevers broken, there was one more visit the boys needed to make. Not to doctors or reporters, but to the dog who had led them out. On a Sunday afternoon, Sheriff Walker drove them up a gravel road to Daniel's small house. Luna lay on the porch in a patch of sunlight, her limp pronounced, but her eyes bright. She rose slowly as the car stopped, tail wagging low and steady. For a long moment the boys only stood, staring at her. She stared back, the silence thick, sacred. Then Miguel stepped forward. He pressed his small palm against her scarred muzzle. She leaned into his touch, licking his hand once with reverent gentleness. "Gracias," he whispered. Jonah knelt next, burying his face in her fur. His shoulders shook, words breaking free. "I didn't think we'd make it." Luna steadied herself so he could hold tighter, answering with silence that spoke louder than words. Ethan crouched, his hand in her ruff, meeting her gaze directly. "You carried us when I couldn't. We held on because of you." He pressed his forehead against hers, lips trembling but firm. Caleb came last, notebook in hand. He sat beside her, laying the sketch across the porch boards. The same proud stance, the same scars. "You're the reason this picture exists, the reason I do." With his pencil, he added one last line, a child's hand resting against her muzzle. Then he closed the book. Daniels watched from the doorway, throat tight. He had known Luna's worth for years, but now he saw it reflected in their faces, the bond forged in mud and stone, carved into memory. The boys lingered, their hands tangled in her fur, their silence full of everything words couldn't carry. When the sheriff finally said it was time, they rose reluctantly. Miguel kissed her head, Jonah wiped his eyes, Ethan's hand lingered to the last moment. Caleb clutched his notebook tight as though guarding treasure. As the car pulled away, Luna lay down again, weary but steady, her gaze never leaving them until they disappeared down the road. On the porch steps, scar against scar, silence against silence, the bond remained, 4 boys and a scarred dog, forever bound by what they carried out of the mountain together. The mountain never forgot storms, and neither did Cedar Hollow. Long after fallen trees were cleared and the rain dried from the streets, people still spoke in hushed voices about the night the earth tried to swallow 4 boys, and the dog who refused to let go. The cave itself, once just an anonymous hollow in the ridge, changed. Trails formed, worn by boots and trembling hands that carried flowers and candles. Someone placed a small white cross at its mouth. Children left folded notes in a shaky pencil. "Thank you, Luna. You're a hero." On the first Sunday after the rescue, candles burned at dusk, their flames trembling against stone as though warming the cold that had nearly claimed the boys. Families gathered in silence, faces lit orange by firelight. Some prayed aloud, others simply wept. The story spread quickly, neighbor to neighbor, then county to county. Strangers arrived not to see tragedy, but to stand in the place where loyalty had defied the storm. They brought offerings, a child's crayon drawing of a German shepherd, a knitted scarf, a school ribbon tied to a branch. The mountain tried to keep them, locals would say, but Luna defied it. She wouldn't let the dark win. At the general store, old men shook their heads by the heater. "I've lived through more storms than I can count," one said, "but I never saw will like that in a dog." Another added, "Not just will, faith. She knew something we couldn't." Teachers retold the story in classrooms. Children drew Luna in the margins of their notebooks, scarred but standing proud. And at night some swore they could still hear echoes of her bark rolling down the ridge, defiant, unstoppable. The cave carried that memory. Candles melted into colored wax at its entrance. Flowers withered, but were replaced. It no longer felt like a wound in the mountain. It felt like a shrine. The boys themselves returned only weeks later, still fragile but determined. Ethan left a smooth river stone. Jonah slipped a page torn from his notebook. We didn't let go. Miguel set down a toy car, trembling. Caleb pressed his sketchbook to the stone. Luna's pencil formed like a prayer. Daniels came sometimes too, standing apart, one hand resting on Luna's head as she sat beside him. When people tried to thank him, he always said the same words. "Don't thank me. Thank her." Years passed. By the time Ethan, Caleb, Jonah, and Miguel returned again, they were no longer boys huddled in fear beneath stone. They were teenagers now, taller, stronger, but carrying shadows still. They followed the trail in silence until they reached a clearing beneath the pines. Luna's grave was simple. Daniels had built it with rough hands. A mound of earth, a wooden cross weathered by sun and rain. Her name was burned into it in steady letters, Luna. The 4 stood before it, the air heavy. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan stepped forward, kneeling to lay his palm on the wood. His throat worked. "You carried me out," he whispered. "When I couldn't take another step, you did it for me. I'll never forget." Jonah came next, his nervous habit of rubbing his neck unchanged. He pressed his hand into the soil. I tried to joke back then, but I was terrified. You let me cry into your fur and didn't make me feel weak. Thank you for that. Miguel's dark eyes shimmered as he placed his hand on the cross. I was so little, so scared. You made me feel safe. I wouldn't be standing here without you. Gracias, Luna. Finally, Caleb knelt. Thin but steady, he opened his sketchbook and tore free the page he had drawn from his hospital bed. Luna, scarred and proud, he laid it gently on the mound. I drew you so the world wouldn't forget. Now you'll stay here, with us. The four knelt together, their hands pressed to wood and earth. Ethan's voice broke the silence. We wouldn't be here without her. Jonah nodded. Miguel whispered, she was more than a dog. Caleb finished softly. She was the reason we're alive. The wind stirred the pines as if in answer. They stayed for a long time, until at last they rose, leaving the sketch fluttering in the breeze. Behind them, the cross stood tall, and though Luna's body lay beneath, her presence lived in the bond carved forever into their marrow. Time moved on, seasons turned, storms came and went, children grew into adults, but the memory of that night never dulled. Each of the boys carried it differently. Ethan clenched his fists when thunder cracked. Jonah's laughter sometimes faltered into silence, recalling when humor had been his only shield. Miguel clung fiercely to family, never again letting his mother's hand go long. Caleb filled sketchbooks with images of storms and light breaking through darkness. Luna etched again and again in pencil and ink. They had been trapped for 72 hours, 3 days that bound them for life. They emerged not untouched, but alive. And always at the heart of their survival was Luna. The town remembered too. The cave became a place of candles and prayers. Children grew up drawing her, teachers spoke her name. Mothers touched the wooden cross and whispered thanks. Daniels kept visiting quietly, never accepting credit. What remained was not only the memory of fear, but the memory of defiance. A scarred German shepherd who refused to let darkness claim what mattered. As the boys grew into men, the story grew with them. Ethan would one day tell his son, when asked why storms made him uneasy, "Because once we fought a storm and won." Jonah would tell his daughter about the dog who let him cry without shame. Miguel would tell his grandchildren in Spanish, "Ella nos salvó," she saved us. Caleb would not need to tell it. His art carried her forever, every line a reminder. In Cedar Hollow, the legend deepened. The old men by the stove said, the mountain tried to keep them, but Luna wouldn't let it. Teachers told new students. Mothers passed it on at kitchen tables. The bark of a dog became a lantern in the dark, and so the story did not end in silence. It ended in light. 4 boys who lived. A town that is remembered. A scarred dog who showed them what it meant to fight for life in the deepest dark. Luna remained, forever in them, in Cedar Hollow and in the mountain's memory. Sometimes the stories that stay with us the longest aren't the ones of grand victories, but of quiet loyalty. A dog who refuses to let go. A scarred companion who teaches us what devotion truly means. German shepherds, with their steady eyes and unshakable hearts, remind us that love doesn't need words. It lives in the way they wait by the door, in the way they carry our burdens without complaint, in the way they guide us through our darkest hours. If you've ever felt that silent bond, that gentle nudge of a muzzle reminding you you're not alone, you already know the healing power of animals. And if you'd like to explore ways to deepen that connection with your own dog, there are some wonderful resources out there that I've found meaningful. You can take a look if it feels right. I'll leave the link below. No pressure, no hurry, just an open invitation from one animal lover to another. Because sometimes, the best gift we can give back to them is the same thing they've always given us: time, trust, and love.